you all also for coming out on a cold winter afternoon and braving a little bit of snow, if you encountered that on your way over here. I think hopefully we're clear for the rest of the day. I am going to turn it over to Dr. Jillian Love, who's with the Jefferson Department of Family and Community Medicine. And so please give a warm welcome to Dr. Love.
Hi everyone, so thank you for having us back. I see some familiar faces, it's nice to be back here. I'm going to talk about nutrition. To be honest, this is a topic that we don't get a ton of education about in medical school, but is something that is so important to all of us. So I'm really hoping that we can open it up for a conversation because everyone has different views, philosophies, opinions, and priorities when it comes to nutrition. So briefly, an outline of what we will cover today. First, I'll just talk a little bit about some general nutrition. We'll then talk specifically about nutrition for older adults because there are some changes that occur with our bodies as we age and also some changes that need to occur with our nutrition intake as we get older. Malnutrition is a very wide medical topic that is important for our health, and we'll touch briefly upon it, although to be honest, malnutrition in and of itself could be an entirely different lecture. And then if we have time, we'll briefly talk about some of the popular diets that you may have seen in the news headlines. So in general, in the United States, nutrition is a really important topic. A third of Americans are obese. So in medicine, we define weight as underweight, healthy weight, overweight, and then more than overweight is obese. So many Americans are overweight, more than a third, but a third are actually classified in that category as obese. 17% of children, Americans under age 18, are now obese in our country. And I wanted to just make this point early on because I'm talking about nutrition in general, but I'm not talking about weight. So being a healthy weight or looking skinny does not mean that you have good nutrition. And so that's just something important to keep in mind throughout this lecture, that we're talking about nutrition and overall health and not just weight. 50%, so half of the people in our country who have preventable diseases related to unhealthy lifestyles. And this is important because although we may not be able to cure diseases once we get them, we are able to alter their course and kind of the outcomes of those diseases if we're able to change things such as nutrition. So who here has seen this pyramid before? Yeah, just about everybody. So this is what I remember being shown in like middle school and high school for healthy eating. And this is what we used to use as the food guide pyramid. And as you probably remember, at the very bottom is the category for grains. So that includes breads, cereals, and rices. Next up, we have vegetables and fruit as important as kind of our second layer of the food that we should be eating most frequently, followed by milks, yogurts, cheeses, the dairy products, and then meats, poultry, fish. And then at the very tip top is fats and oils, and those are really the items that we're meant to use as less frequently as possible. But recently, the people who make up all of the nutrition and dietary guidelines for our country have kind of revamped this pyramid. And so now what most organizations are using to help guide nutrition is something called the new food pyramid. So you can see the old one in the top corner. But really what this new pyramid emphasizes is that adults should also be incorporating exercise as part of their nutrition. So not only should we be focusing on specific food groups and what to eat, but also that movement and physical activity is really important to our overall nutritional status. You can see at the bottom there, they do have the recommendations for each food group: 6 ounces of grains, 2.5 cups of vegetables, 2 cups of fruit, 3 cups of milk, and about 5 ounces of meat and beans. And we'll get into each of these recommendations in more detail in a little bit. So if you go to www.heart.org, it's the American Heart Association, which is a medical organization that puts out a lot of medical recommendations, but also puts out a lot of really great informational pamphlets and outlines, guidebooks. And they have, to be honest, tons of links that I could have put in this presentation, but I really just stuck to one because they really broke down the recommendations for each food category very clearly. So to go more in depth about exactly what is recommended that we should be eating each day, in regards to vegetables, we should all be eating 5 servings of vegetables a day. Anybody have any idea what would constitute 1 serving? Sure, just shout it out.
A cup of 80 cooked green vegetables.
A cup of cooked vegetables, okay. Were you gonna? Bowl of oatmeal, okay. Yes? Buckwheat? Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting, it's a good point. So oats we tend to think of more in the grains category, but you can add things to your oatmeal like fruits or other healthy snacks that could take that oatmeal and have it kind of be incorporated into other food groups as well. But yes, for vegetables, we tend to think more of things like leafy greens. So they recommend about 1 cup of raw vegetables or half a cup of sliced or chopped up vegetables. In regards to fruit, 4 servings. So anybody have an idea of what a serving of a fruit would be?
I'd say 3/4 of a cup of a wild fruit.
3/4 of a cup of a wild fruit?
Because it has more sugar than vegetables usually, except for carrots. Carrots are the only thing that have, it's more of a taste, naturally higher sugar than sugar.
Right.
Certain small tomatoes,
Fruits do have more sugars than vegetables.
usually.
So in general, fruit is about 1 medium piece of fruit. So that can be a medium banana, a medium orange, a medium apple. I think that's kind of the easiest way to think of a fruit serving size. But if you want to chop up the fruit like we have here, half a cup of fruit would be considered 1 serving. Dried fruit also does count as a fruit serving, but as we mentioned, fruit has a lot of sugar, and when you eat dried fruit, you're really just taking out all of the water, but keeping the sugar in the fruit. So you're eating highly sugar concentrated foods without taking in that water, and so it may still taste really good and sweeter, but it's probably not going to fill you up as much as eating a whole apple or fresh strawberries would. Dairy, 3 servings a day. Who's got an idea for a dairy serving?
About 8 ounces of skim, 1 or 5% milk.
8 ounces of skim, half or 1% milk. Okay.
And I don't know if whole milk is
So a
close to the
cup.
same or not, but
Yes?
maybe should more.
If you're a vegan, you can have the almond, soy, all the nut milks. You know, you can also have the vegan cheese and vegan butters.
So that's a great point for people who may follow particular diets. There are options that can help get you the vitamins that you might get through the dairy products that don't have you actually eating dairy, animal-derived foods. Good question. So it may not technically be considered dairy, it would be non-dairy, but I believe some of the foods are still fortified with the vitamins that you would get with dairy products. Right, things like calcium that we'll get into in a little bit. So you're right, 1 cup of milk or yogurt would classify as 1 serving of dairy. And then grains, so the new food pyramid recommends up to 6 servings of grains a day. This is decreased from that original food pyramid that almost all of us were familiar with. So they're trying to cut down kind of on carbohydrates. Any thoughts about 1 serving of grains?
I don't know as far as the amount, but I know oatmeal, quinoa, I can't remember all of them exactly.
Yeah, there are tons of different of grains. Yes.
I'll say a plain piece of bread.
Exactly. So 1 piece of bread would be considered a serving of grains, or 1 cup of cereal, half a cup of cooked rice or pasta, which surprised me because when I make pasta, I make a lot more than half a cup, but I think it's important to remember that one serving size really is just half a cup of cooked pasta. They then got into the other food categories, and these are foods that are not necessarily recommended that you eat every single day of the week, but still should incorporate it into our diets throughout the week. So poultry, meat, and eggs, 8 to 9 servings per week. And so one serving of this would be about 3 ounces of cooked meat, which usually you can estimate by looking at it as the size of a deck of cards. So if you get a piece of steak or a piece of chicken and comparing it to what a deck of cards would look like, that's about a serving size.
Like, we use Uno cards because there's more cards in there.
Not Uno cards, yes, just regular pinochle
I'm just
playing
joking.
cards. Also, but it's a good point. 1 egg or 2 servings of egg whites are also considered a serving size. In regards to fish or seafood, it is recommended that we incorporate this into our diets, 2 to 3 servings a week generally.
I had a question. Somebody had pointed out the vegan diet. I've been hearing rumors that the vegan diet is better for your body.
Absolutely.
So instead of using like, even if you're pescatarian, fish and poultry, could we use something like beans and legumes instead to replace them? And would it count the same way or no?
So that's a great point. So the question is, if we are following a particular diet, like a vegan or vegetarian diet, could we use other food sources other than meats or seafood or fish to get that protein? And the short answer is yes.
Okay.
And we'll touch base a little bit very briefly on vegan and vegetarian diets later on.
Okay.
So with fish or seafood, it's the same size, serving size as a piece of meat, so 3 ounces of cooked. So again, thinking about that deck of cards. Nuts, seeds, beads, and legumes, which is like a pea plant, it's recommended that we each get about 5 servings of these per week. And so 1 serving is 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, which again, kind of like the pasta, is not a lot of peanut butter. It's really just 1 small spoon of it. Or
Would that be
2,
the same? I'm
I'm sorry?
Would that be the same as cashew and other nut butters?
So in general, 1 tablespoon of any sort of nut butter.
Okay.
Yes, but you can have 2 tablespoons of the fresh nuts or seeds.
Because I asked you that because most of the time they'll claim that they're not made with trans fats, but on the back it'll say hydrogenated oil. And that's with most peanut butters that I've seen in the stores, in regular stores. So I'm like, you're trying to trick me? It's a different brand.
So peanut butters and different sorts of nut butters are generally high in fat. It tends to be a fat that is healthy for us. However, with any sort of fat, we do need to be careful. And kind of one way to get around the hydrogenated oils, which are kind of the not so healthy oils, is to buy natural peanut butter or almond butter, things like that. It tends to be more liquid, so you have to stir it and mix it up, but it does tend to be healthier than the kind of peanut butter that's more solid in the jar.
Shoot, it's a shame I can't use more than that because
Which leads me to our fats and oils. So in general, 1 tablespoon of oil is considered a serving. So this is important to think about when we're cooking things like chicken or vegetables or fish and we're using oil in the pan or on the tray. 1 tablespoon, again, is a really small serving, and that constitutes 1 serving size. Also, 1 tablespoon of margarine, low-fat mayonnaise, or light salad dressings. Any questions on those serving sizes?
Not the serving size, but I've heard that margarine is like a big no-no, period.
Yeah,
I've heard it's just worse.
worse than butter.
Yeah, well, and then you just, if you don't have anything, you're better at all. So, it's still recommended that you eat.
So I would say if you're going to eat fats or oils, the most important thing is to balance how much you're eating. I think our data and research kind of goes back and forth as to whether margarine or butter, low-fat milk and yogurt, or higher-fat milk and yogurt, kind of which is better. It does depend if you have certain medical conditions, like if you have heart problems, or diabetes or anything that would put you at a higher risk for a stroke or a heart attack, we would encourage as low fat of a diet as possible. So ideally, maybe one would say nothing is the best, but also we have to enjoy our lives and have a little bit of things that taste good.
Just to chime in on the question about margarine. Historically, margarine contained partially hydrogenated oils that are known as artificial trans fats, which I think the woman over here mentioned earlier. At this point, the FDA has completely eliminated partially hydrogenated oils and trans fats, like artificial trans fats, in all products. It's a mandate across the nation. So margarine that we have today is different than the margarine that we had 10 years ago. Yes. So I just wanted to kind of add that in, because yes, that is exactly why we were told, hey, you know what? Baby boomer, my mom thought margarine was really healthy, and as a kid, that's what we grew up on. Because she was told butter was bad and margarine was good. But that's exactly the reason why.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I want to say something about the oils,
Yes.
Olive oil, flaxseed oil,
Mm-hmm.
poppy seed oil. There's a lot of different oils.
There are.
And what you were saying about how they banned it because like it's in all of it was in everything.
Mm-hmm.
It was in everything.
Yeah, lots of different oils. So again, really, I think one of the most important things is to really figure out how to balance these recommendations and still eat things that we like and still enjoy our quality of life. So just in general, things we should try to be eating more of include fresh fruits and vegetables, low-fat dairy, whole grains, lean protein, and drinking lots of water. Things to try to eat less of include the fats. So in general, the amount of fats that we take in should be less than 10% of our daily calories. Sugar should also be less than 10%. Sodium or salt is something that I think a lot of us are aware of. We see low sodium labels. We might be trying not to add salt to our food. It's something that I talk to my patients a lot about, especially with certain medical conditions that you need to really think about the salt. And in general, the recommendations are that for healthy people who don't have any specific dietary restrictions, that we should still be limiting our sodium or salt intake to less than 2,300 milligrams daily. And then alcohol, women, kind of the max recommended daily amount would be 1 drink, and then for men it would be 2 drinks each day. Yes?
Let me go to alcohol, but that doesn't include, I think wine is different from liquor, because wine has some beneficial things. Is that how they do that, or do they just include wine as alcohol?
Right, so it's a great point. The question is it specifically wine that gives that health benefit? And I haven't looked at the most recent data, but there was some data coming out that it may not just be red wine that gives the benefit, and it may be 1 serving of alcohol, period. I think that being said, again, we know particularly with older adults, alcohol affects our bodies differently as we get older, and different people's bodies are able to metabolize or break down the alcohol at different rates. So it's really knowing your body the best and how your body handles alcohol.
And maybe not drinking wine, but I know, like people in, say, Venice, or wine with your meal, as opposed to just drinking, socially. So that's a little bit different, because the alcohol is absorbed in food, it's not coming. So, yeah.
Right, and that brings up another great point, that different cultures also have different customs relating to food. Yeah. But nutrition in general isn't only related to our food, it's also related to our lifestyles. And so I think coming up with healthy habits that can help us maintain the best nutritional status possible is also important to talk about, rather than only focusing on specific serving sizes that are recommended to us by a medical organization. So I'm going to talk really briefly about a couple different habits that we can work on to help maintain as good of a nutrition status as we can, and those include snacks, portion control, food preparation, and then exercise. So snacks, I think we've all seen lots of snack machines around pretty much anywhere we go, and they're very convenient, especially now that they take credit cards. But snacking is something that can really impact our nutrition, especially because when we want a snack, we're usually hungry already. And so one of the best ways to help prevent those kind of unhealthy snacks is by making sure that we have healthy prepared snacks. And so one way of doing that is just making sure in our homes that we have fresh, healthy snacks available easily at the ready. So we don't reach for the candy bars when we can reach for something healthy that's right there too. So one recommendation is just to keep healthy, cut up fresh fruits or vegetables in your fridge. And they're already there and ready. You don't have to cook them or do anything like that. You can just go and grab them and start snacking. Keeping fruit around the house instead of cookie jars or candy bowls. If you see it, you'll think of it more. So really trying to keep candy out of eyesight and keeping fresh options available. Again, making sure you drink plenty of water as part of your routine. We'll talk more about water in a little bit, but this is really something that's important. Not only does water keep us hydrated, but if we're dehydrated, we might mistake that for feeling hungry, when really what our body wants is just water. Portion control. Like I mentioned, I'm not talking about weight loss or getting skinny, but portion control is also part of nutrition. And so the picture to the left shows you that about half of your plate should be containing vegetables and a quarter of your plate should be protein, with a quarter carbohydrates or those grains that we talked about earlier. If you're trying to cut down on how much you're eating, you can use smaller plates, maybe not the teeny tiny, side plates, but there are some general plates that are just smaller than the huge plates that most restaurants now serve on. Eating slowly. If we're really hungry by the time we sit down to eat, or if we're really rushed when we're eating, we may just sit down and eat everything that's on our plate and then not really take a breather until the end of the meal, and we might not have needed all of that food. So really just pausing to see if you're still hungry and if your body still really does want more food while you're eating is helpful.
I just wondered about a lot of interruptions and questions, but I was reading something and it stated that the more you rush when you eat, the more it adds weight to your stomach, and I believe that is true.
Okay.
So,
I'm not sure. I haven't heard that, to be honest, but I think that if you're rushing to eat, you're probably going to eat more, and different people carry their weight in different places. So I think if you're someone who carries most of the weight in the belly, the belly probably does get bigger.
it's saying that it's also like really worse for your health when you have a lot of health.
Yes.
And I don't know why the reason is.
Yeah. Which leads me to the next point of don't feel like you have to clean your plate. This is something that I was told every night growing up. And probably a lot of us were, but really studies have shown that if your kids or family members are full with food still left on their plate, let it be on their plate, just leave it there, and then you'll have some for leftovers. There's no health benefit and there are health detriments to forcing yourself to eat food just because it's in front of you. Enough sleep is also really important, and I put this on this slide just to quickly mention because there has been a lot of research that has shown that people who are sleep deprived or who aren't getting 6 to 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night do feel hungrier. And we actually have a hormone in our bodies called cortisol, and that's kind of a stress hormone. And when you are sleep deprived, that cortisol level increases, and that makes you hungrier and actually makes you crave more carbohydrates and kind of all those snacks that are in the snack machines rather than healthy salads and that sort of thing. So getting enough sleep is really also important to help us be able to eat healthy and the appropriate portion sizes. Food preparation, so someone mentioned all the different types of oil, so I'm glad you brought that up. So number one, don't grocery shop when you're hungry. Like I mentioned, when we're hungry, we might get hangry, and we might just eat anything that we possibly can. Another point in the grocery stores, it varies a little bit on grocery stores, but a rule that I've heard in general is if you go into a grocery store and only walk around the outside perimeter of the grocery store, that tends to be where all of the refrigerated foods are, which means that they're fresher. So things that are canned and in the middle of the grocery store, they've probably got a lot of preservatives in them or can sit on a shelf for years, which is great for sustainability, but it's not that fresh foods that really give us the most vitamins and nutrients that we can. So number one, don't go when you're hungry. Number two, when you do go, if you can stick to the perimeter and go around the edge, just pay attention to that next time you're in the store, and you'll see it's really true. All the chips and pretzels and cookies are all in the middle of the store, but you also have to avoid them at the checkout line as well.
Exactly right.
Were you going to?
Well, because it's systematically set up that way. All sugar, all canned goods, all sodas,
Right.
all juices,
Mhm.
the water is separate. Then you have all the chips and the pretzels. So, I've observed how these supermarkets are set up. Now when you go into like Whole Foods, Weaver's Way, Mom's Organic, all these Trader Joe's, it's set up differently.
Right. Yeah. Once you do have your food from the grocery store and you're starting to prepare it, in general, baking or grilling food is better than frying. When we fry things, we tend to use lots of different oils, and that can add not only fat, but also salt intake and a lot of other unhealthy fats. In general, olive oil tends to be better than butter, and we've talked about the saturated fats and kind of touched on that. I think that in itself could be a whole nother lecture, but just very briefly, I put this chart here in the corner to show you that olive oil is second from the bottom, and it has a small amount of saturated fat, and those saturated fats are the ones that really take a lot of energy and exercise in order to burn off. So you want more of the unsaturated fats, which is the yellow. We talked briefly about salt, and we'll talk more about it in a little bit, but one way to avoid salt, salt gives our food flavor, and I don't think anybody wants to eat bland, unflavorful food, but there are ways to flavor our food that don't include salt, and those include lots of spices or herbs. So, why do we need to be careful about salt? In general, salt can increase our blood pressure, and we know that higher blood pressure leads to increased rates of stroke, heart attack, and also kidney disease. As I mentioned, everyone's daily goal should be less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day. If you have problems like kidney disease or heart problems, your doctor may tell you to stick to a goal even less than that.
I have a question. When you go now to the salt and stuff, there's like all these different salts. Like you'll have doctors say use sea salt instead of table salt. All salts basically are the same, right?
To be honest, I don't know about the different nutrient facts in different salts,
Okay.
but I would say from a medical standpoint, keeping your total limit of salt, regardless of what kind of salt it is, would still be the same general recommendation.
Does
Yes,
potassium help eliminate salt?
not that I know of. I haven't heard of potassium balancing salt excretion. We know that the kidneys function to deal with both sodium and potassium, so we would want to maintain kind of normal levels of salt so that our kidneys can also maintain the same levels of potassium.
There are salt substitutes that are potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride, so I'm wondering if that might answer your question too. So there is a salt substitute where you would be taking in less sodium
Got it.
as it's potassium instead of.
And I was told that potassium basically balances out the levels, so they're a little more even to the body. But I don't know if that's true because I'm not a doctor. But I've had diabetes since I was 3 and I'm 41, and I figured out that it does help with this swelling in my feet that I've gotten from too much salt, which went to a bean, which is another thing that people.
I think we have another question. Yes?
Yeah, I'm wondering about, because I've heard that, people use a little bit of pain a lot in their life, that they occasionally crave salt because it helps counteract something about the pain.
I'm sorry, pain?
Yes.
I haven't done a lot of research in regards to that. I think that one idea that I have is that if you're in pain or uncomfortable, you might have higher levels of that stress hormone that I mentioned, the cortisol, which generally makes our bodies crave more things like carbohydrates, which can be salty, especially if you have chips or pretzels. I don't know, to be honest. I'd have to do some research and get back to you, but that's one thought that I have that might be.
I was going to say something funny. but if you soak in Epsom salt, that'll help with the pain.
Yeah. Right, so we don't only eat salt. Salt does have other benefits like soaking sore feet. So in general, foods to avoid that are high in salt, like I mentioned, chips, fried foods, canned soups and vegetables are something that are really sneaky with their salt. You think that you're eating vegetables and that you're being healthy eating a can of green beans, but those can really be high in salt. And any pre-marinated meats as well. Really just buying fresh chicken breast or turkey breast right out of the poultry section is the best way, and then seasoning it yourself at home.
I found out from Thai, this is if you can do it, if you like yogurt, coat the meat in yogurt. That's for Thai, and it's a different flavor and it's healthier.
Yeah.
It's fantastic for lamb and stuff like that. It's unbelievable. But yeah, coat it if you get somebody that knows that. Like you would marinate, like say chicken and yogurt. Try it. And see.
Something plain yogurt.
Plain yogurt if that's your thing, or even fruit yogurt if you know. But try it and see if it complements the meat.
And I bet yogurt with some spices could also really add a lot of flavor. Thank you. So, the different foods have different levels of salt, but I wanted to put this up as just one point that Campbell's chicken noodle soup, I think we've all probably seen this in the store. One can of this has your entire daily value of salt. So again, really just making sure that you look at the labels when you're grocery shopping, and we'll touch briefly on a nutrition label in a little bit. So,
How does the research account for places like, say, Japan has a very high salt diet, and yet seems fairly healthy? Is it something else they're eating, or high water consumption?
right, so the question is, how do cultures like Japan, who may have a very high salt intake in their diet, still stay healthy? I don't know many of the statistics specifically about Japanese diets. I would say that in general, I do think that they have a lot of stir-fried vegetables and things like that in their diet, which, a little bit of salt is okay. You can also buy low sodium soy sauce. So if you're still having some salt but balancing it with other healthy foods, I think that, again, it's just all about a balance. And you mentioned drinking a lot of water also if you're eating salty foods, but I would have to do research specifically about that.
In terms of perception of a person's obese and a person's overweight, how do you feel in general when it comes to people in the urban city in terms of the perception of it, just the perception, the word among perceptions of people who are fat or obese or, and some people say if you're too skinny, you're not healthy. So there's a lot of questions even with that. So it's like, when will our perceptions end on that notion of how we feel, what is healthy and what is not?
I think that's a really good point, and that is a day's worth of discussions. How do we kind of balance our perceptions? I think that there is definitely a stigma against being overweight or obese that I think is broad and expands widely across our country. I think that's something that we need to really be conscious of as we're working together and helping take care of each other. I think also, though, kind of the flip side of that is that, and being acceptance and embracing our body types, is that we also want to be able to, in the medical field, keep our patients as healthy as possible. And we do know that being underweight or overweight can have health consequences. So really trying to balance those things together, I think, and finding the healthiest balance for each person individually. Yes?
So if you were a potato chip eater, or pretzel, would you say a serving, maybe 15 little small pretzels is a serving, or a handful of chips a serving? Is that in moderation?
So, yes, is the short answer. But also on each bag that you get, it will tell you how many servings are in the bag. which is really key to look at because you might buy what looks like to be a small bag of Cheetos and there are 3.5 servings in that one bag. So really important that whenever you are buying a bag of, you know, like I said, you have to have something of what you like, just making sure that you have an idea of what actually is a serving size because it does change depending on the food. So just very quickly, here are some ideas for how to season your food if you're not trying to use salt. We already had the yogurt as one idea. If you're looking for Italian flavorings, you can use things like basil and oregano, rosemary and sage. If you'd rather sort of an Asian flavor, you could do ginger, garlic, and crushed red pepper flakes. And there are just basically a bunch of different spice blends that you can do to season your food. And you can just Google different seasoning blends, and that will really help you give your food a lot of flavor without using salt. Very briefly, since we talked about the nutrition labels, I wanted to just bring this up for one slide. So when looking at a nutrition label, we already mentioned that the serving size is really important, and that's what is at the top of the nutrition label by the number 1 on this slide. Number 2, checking how many calories are in the entire container versus how many calories are in one serving. So usually the number of calories that is shown as that big 60 is the number of calories per serving. So if there are 5 servings in that box, you need to multiply that number by 5 if you're going to eat the entire box to know how many calories you're really eating. For number 3, limiting certain nutrients. So you can see below the number of calories, they list things like all the different types of fats, cholesterol, and there's that sodium number in the middle that we talked about. Number 4, getting enough of the beneficial nutrients. So each nutrition label also lists the different vitamins, which we'll get into in a little bit. And then lastly, at the bottom, it will tell you the percent of your daily recommended value. This is something that, to be honest, I personally don't use a lot, but I think is important just to keep in mind that the percent of the daily value is what is recommended based on a general 2,000, 2,200 calorie diet. So if you're trying to make changes in your diet, just being aware that that percent of the daily value is what is recommended for a general diet. So what does 200 calories look like? I just put a couple of slides in here. So you can have a teeny tiny piece of butter, or you can have 3 eggs for 200 calories, or that many apples, or even more carrots. So this is really showing that those low fat, higher nutrient foods, you're able to eat more still on that same number of calories. There we go. Here's one other slide about some calories. So broccoli has 34 calories. One orange has about 50 calories, or 100 grams of an orange, I'm sorry. A banana, small banana, around 90 calories. Chicken, 165. Then when you get into oats and the grains, they can be higher in calories. So the oats and bread. One of those larger bags of Skittles has 400 and some calories. And really, I put this slide here to show you that the granola, which I think that sometimes when we think about granola, we think of it as a healthy snack, but it still is really high in calories. And also a lot of cereals and granolas have a lot of added sugar. So you might think you're being healthy by choosing oatmeal or granola, but it's really important to pay attention to the sugar. And that's something that if you are eating oatmeal, instead of buying the apples and cinnamon flavored oatmeal, just buying plain oatmeal and adding your own apples, your own cinnamon, own fresh fruit on top can really make a big difference in your nutrition.
That's a good point because I worked for Whole Foods at one point in my life. Customers will always come in and say, "Still cut oats." Is that true? That's the...
So that is kind of more of a fresh, less processed form of oats and cereal rather than the kinds that have been processed and packaged and sweetened and had everything added. But again, it's a balance because it still is high in carbohydrates and everything.
What do you feel about organic versus non-organic? Is that?
Oh. I think everyone has different opinions on organic versus non-organic. I think regardless of if you buy organic or non-organic, you do bring up a really good point of washing your fruits and vegetables. Even if it says that they're pre-washed, you should really rinse them again. And even if you're not going to eat the skin, if you're going to peel the apple before eating it or peel the orange, still washing them will help get any pesticides off, whether it's organic or not.
But just the concept of, I guess the jury's still out about whether or not that is overall, whether organic is kind of leading to, because it's supposed to be less pesticides, right?
Right.
Or none.
But I still rinse it.
Right.
I'm sorry?
I still rinse my organic fruits and vegetables.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether they have it or they don't, you could also use some white vinegar and water.
Vinegar
Then
rinse,
you
yeah.
help kill off or
Actually, baking soda is much better.
think
Okay.
baking soda.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Is there any basic difference between frozen and fresh vegetable fruits?
That's another great point. Thank you for bringing that up. So in general, when looking for frozen vegetables, it's kind of like looking at any other sort of packaged food like oatmeal. So buying just frozen vegetables that don't have anything added is the healthiest kind of frozen. Any sort of canning will probably have salt or other things added, but you can buy fruits or vegetables that are just the vegetables that have been frozen while they're still fresh. And that's a great way to keep fresh, healthy foods during the winter especially. So as I mentioned, physical activity is really important in our nutrition, and it's a balance with your calories in and your calories out if you are trying to maintain your weight. So physical activity, tons of research about how this helps our nutrition and our overall health. It has improved mobility, improved cardiovascular health, it helps our memory, it helps our mood, and it has also been shown to improve overall mortality. Most important thing about exercise is really finding something you love. If you hate doing it, I won't convince myself to do it regularly, so finding something that you really like and that you're interested in doing and that you might be able to do with a friend or that you could at least see yourself keep doing is the most important thing to make sure that it's a habit that you're making that you can continue. Which leads me to making it a habit. Once we have habits ingrained kind of in our mind and in our bodies, we're more likely to continue them, which makes it sustainable. And if you are trying to lose weight, 3,500 calories is about equal to 1 pound. So that's a way that if you are counting calories and weighing that scale of calories in versus calories out, that's about how many calories you would need to get rid of in order to lose 1 pound. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services did put out a pamphlet that listed their top 8 healthy eating goals. So this is kind of a summary of most things that we've already talked about. So quickly we can zip through them. Number 1, making half of your plate fruits and vegetables. Brightly colored fruits and vegetables have a lot of vitamins. And also you can have side dishes of fruits or even having fruit as your dessert. You can still get sweet fruits. As we mentioned, they do have some sugars that can kind of pacify that sweet craving without going for the brownies or cookies. Making half of the grains you eat whole grains, so brown bread isn't necessarily healthy bread, really looking for things that say whole grains or whole wheat. Again, this is kind of the rolled oats and wild rice. Fat-free or low-fat milk is still what's recommended. Choosing a variety of lean protein foods. So if you're buying packaged meat, looking at it to make sure it's 90% lean or higher. And choosing lighter colored meats like turkey, chicken breast, rather than beef. We've talked a lot about salt, comparing the sodium. You can buy things like low or reduced sodium, no salt added. Drinking water instead of sugary drinks. So sodas, iced teas, those are huge calorie counts and a lot of sweeteners and sugars that that really aren't great for nutrition. And so if you're able to flavor your water with fruit or drinking seltzer water, that's kind of a quick and easy, not necessarily easy, but a quick way to cut out unnecessary sugar and calories. Eating some seafood, we mentioned it's recommended 2 to 3 times per week, and it provides a lot of minerals and heart-healthy fats that we may not get elsewhere. And then cutting back on the solid fats. So not only the sweets like dessert, but also fried foods like pizza, And then fatty meat. So just meat does not mean that it's healthy. Again, we want to try to get the low-fat meats. So things that are high in fat that are meats are things like ribs, hot dogs, and sausages. That being said, eating healthy can be expensive. If you go to a store, canned foods are cheaper than the fresh vegetables. And so I did want to touch on how we can really focus on getting the proper nutrition when on a budget. So the American Heart Association, that organization that I mentioned previously, also has a lot of recommendations and handouts on how to eat healthy on a budget. And so this is just a picture of one of their handouts that they have. And they broke it down into planning ahead and also at the store. So for planning ahead, they recommended planning your meals each week, making a shopping list, knowing what you have in your home so that you don't go to the store and spend money on something that you already have in your home or that you could have used something different in your home to substitute it. Saving receipts will allow you to really look at the price after you buy and can compare. And I've started doing that, and it's an easier way to see what is expensive and what things are costing the most on the receipts. And then collecting coupons. There are lots of coupons in newspapers and online. You can get coupons. Certain stores have discount cards that you can use at the checkout. So those are all different ways. And then once you're at the store, comparing prices. So that specific store brand item is probably cheaper than Hidden Valley Ranch or, a salad dressing of that certain type. Not that Hidden Valley Ranch is the most nutritional item to pick. You can then use your coupons, your discount codes. Buying in bulk is something that can also save money. So, memberships at places like Costco or Sam's Club, you can really buy in bulk, but even without those memberships at Acme or places in the city, you can buy more of one item and get it cheaper. And if it's something that you can either freeze or store, that's a way to stock up and save money. Saving with seasonal produce, in general, the fresh that is in season will be cheaper. So in the fall, apples tend to be less expensive. Strawberries can be more expensive in the winter because we have to ship them in from warmer climates, that sort of thing. And then really paying attention at the checkout to make sure that we're getting those discounts with those coupons that we've saved up. Yes?
Some supermarkets have senior discount days too. You should know which supermarket has which senior day. You know that day.
That's a great point, thank you. So different stores have different senior citizen discount days. And so just Googling them, do you usually find it on the store website, or what would be the best way? Maybe calling?
ShopRite is Wednesdays.
ShopRite's Wednesday.
I'm not sure about Acme. You may know the Acme. It used to be Tuesday.
Okay.
I don't know how you find out. I just have to know something where I shop.
I'll have to do some
But
research.
ask him.
Yes,
When you go to the store, ask him. Go back the next time.
thank you.
I know the resources that you can get all discounts for seniors, that's available on the website. So you get the whole list of shopping for discounts and what days are in the stores, from food to clothing.
Where is it?
We can send it out to folks.
That's great. Okay.
Co-ops,
Yes, yeah.
they're available if you volunteer, there's food, they're available.
That's a great point. Co-ops, volunteering, and then you can take a portion of that home.
Also, one wonderful thing is now everybody's delivering.
Right?
I mean, I'm surprised everybody's delivering. They just deliver. It costs maybe a little bit more, but again, as he's saying, like seniors, you can't
Right.
maybe go out 3 or 4 times a week to shop for food.
Exactly.
And then you're also looking for discounts in general, or in the zip codes. There's a site called antbertha.org that you can use. You can just plug in your zip code, and it will have everything within your zip code where you can go. So
What's that? I don't know.
it's called Aunt Bertha.
Yeah.
Aunt Bertha. It's called Aunt Bertha.
And so that website is Aunt Bertha, AUNTBERTHA, and you can just type in your zip code and get all the discounts. Wonderful.
Food, clothing, children, adults, if you need requirements, if you need my income place.
Thank you.
And I don't think people know this, but the Aldi supermarket is actually part of Trader Joe's. So what you might see at Trader Joe's, you'll get different names, so
Great.
and much cheaper.
Thank
Plus,
you.
ShopRite and Fresh Grocer are the same.
Okay.
Oh,
So lots of networks.
I'm going to mention the share program. If you're in Norfolk, it's 29th and Honey Park, but for $14, you can get $25 to $30 worth of food. And it's a fantastic program. It's been more than 40 or 50 years. It's kind of fun to co-op. And you go pick out frozen food, fresh food. But that's one of the all-time great programs.
And that's a co-op at 29th
29th and
and Huntington?
Park, yeah.
Share program.
And a lot of churches will take you there or have a share program
Okay.
where you pick out your food, you send, you order in, and it can be delivered to your church. So if your
Got
church
it.
is not part of it.
Great, thank you.
And another, just one more website, phillyfoodfinding.org is also another website that people can use to find it. And once again, if you zip code in, you'll have to find it.
What's that?
And that's Philly Food
Food Finder.
Philly Food Finder.
Right.
Maybe we can compile all these together and we'll send the list out. Or we already have them, okay. So just really quickly, I know we only have a few more minutes, but while we're talking about shopping on a budget, there are a lot of lists of different foods. If you Google shopping on a budget, a ton of different resources come up, but I just wanted to include this one list that were all foods of about $2. So non-fat Greek yogurt is healthy, you get that dairy, you get that protein, and it's also not expensive. Frozen vegetables, as we mentioned. You can also buy fresh bags of spinach for less than $2. Canned beans, so that will still give you that lean protein, but it's important to remember to rinse them because they can be high in salt. Canned tuna, if you're going to get canned tuna, buying it in water instead of oil is a great way to make it healthier. Canned or jarred marinara sauce, paying attention to salt there is something that's helpful. And sugar, yes, exactly. Eggs, lentils, and then you've got your grains like your potatoes, your oats, brown rice, and whole wheat pasta. You can still buy pasta that's whole wheat, that's healthier and still inexpensive.
Or you can even do the whole, like to make it kind of like pasta, like a little spiraling machines.
So using vegetables with sauces to eat more vegetables, less carbohydrates, exactly. So I'm just in 2 minutes going to zip through nutrition in older adults because as we do get older, this is Elder Initiative with Jefferson Geriatrics, and so I wanted to just do a few slides. I know. I've got plenty more slides. So this is a summary pretty much of everything that we've already talked about. But there is specifically a My Plate guideline for older adults. Different changes happen as we get older, so our tastes change, our food habits may change, our appetites can change, physical activity and body shapes can all change. So in general, your body composition as we get older, we have decreased bone mass, decreased muscle mass, and decreased water content, and we get more fat mass in our bodies. Our metabolism tends to slow down as we get older, which means that some older adults require less calories to maintain their same body as they would have in their 30s or 40s. However, we also have a decreased ability to sense how thirsty we are as we get older, and decreased thirst perception of our body to be able to regulate water and thirst. So it's really important as we get older to concentrate and really pay attention to how much water we're drinking to make sure that we're staying hydrated. This is just a chart showing you that as we get older, how many calories we need per day does decrease. Calcium and vitamin D are important for bone health. It's recommended that we get at least 1,000 milligrams of calcium daily. The best way to get calcium is not by taking vitamins or supplements, but by eating dairy products. Vitamin D helps our body absorb that calcium, so it's important to get both of them together. And you can get vitamin D through foods like eggs and fish, and supplements if needed. 30% of adults over 70 are low in vitamin D. So this is something that we can test for in the office if needed. Symptoms you might have are feeling tired, but you may also have no symptoms whatsoever. But we worry about vitamin D because if you have low vitamin D, you are at a high risk of having osteoporosis, which could lead you to fractures or falls. And we can test for it with a lab test. Vitamin B is another vitamin that we pay attention as we get older, because as we get older, our bodies are less able to absorb vitamin B. You can have some symptoms like fatigue, memory loss, numbness and tingling in your feet or your hands. So if you have these symptoms, you should talk to a doctor, but these symptoms are not always caused by vitamin B deficiency. And on the right, you have pictures of some foods that that are high in vitamin B.
I have a question. Are there any vegetables for people that want to go into veganism or vegetarianism instead of all the meat, vitamin B?
Yes, ma'am.
What was the question?
I was asking what were the vitamins that were found in vegetables if you want to go vegan or vegetarian instead of in meat, like chicken and fish and stuff.
Yes.
So beans and things like lentils, and nuts are options that are high in protein.
It's nuts, like-
Very briefly, I already mentioned the calcium and vitamin D recommendations for older adults. Vitamin B and multivitamins can be asked your doctor about. In general, if you're eating a healthy, well-balanced diet, it's not necessarily recommended that you should take a multivitamin. There are a lot of advertisements out there that encourage vitamins, but anything that you buy over the counter is not necessarily regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, so you don't always know exactly what you're getting in there. But things that we recommend against are vitamin E, vitamin A, and beta carotene. And these vitamins have actually been shown to be more dangerous than beneficial.
Is there a reason why?
So vitamin E specifically was shown to cause increased mortality in studies, so increased rates of death.
You know, also vitamins do have the recommendation, meaning they have been actually suggested that they have all the qualities that they need,
Right.
which is anyway.
Yeah. Fiber in general, in one word, it's good. If you are constipated, it helps you move your bowels. If you're having diarrhea, it can also help firm up your bowel movement. So in general, eating high fiber foods also help us not only regulate our body's digestive system, but also help us stay full. But it's important to, and they can reduce cholesterol, reduce your risk of heart disease. And studies have shown that there is a link with increased fiber and decreased overall mortality. But it's important to make sure that you do drink a lot of water when you're eating high fiber foods. These include things like fresh fruits and vegetables, but also whole grains. But if you are still having GI problems, your doctor may recommend that you start taking a supplement like Metamucil or Citrusol. We already talked about this. Fluids are really important. Not only does our body become less able to detect if we're thirsty, it also becomes less able to concentrate our urine, which means if we're peeing out more fluid, we need to take in more fluid in order to stay hydrated and regulate our electrolytes. And as I mentioned, physical activity, not only is it good for memory and mood, but it helps increase our appetite, strengthen muscle and bones, and helps improve other medical conditions, as well as improving our overall nutritional status, such as diabetes, depression, and osteoporosis. Nutrition shakes is something that a lot of older adults ask about. In general, I'll say that a supplement like Ensure is not recommended to replace a meal. So if you have family members or friends who may be thin or losing weight, you can recommend Ensure as added, but that's in addition to a meal.
I wanted to say something about the nutrition shakes.
Yes.
I thought you do a green juice every day. It's really good. Green juice every
Green
day.
juice every day.
Yeah, like kale. Well, I eat a lot of different stuff, but like kale and garlic and carrot. And I've been doing that for a while. And I use like Kagan water.
You said what type of water?
Kagan water.
So making fresh drinks on your own with lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, making green juices, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And that helps your fiber too?
Is that?
I figured as much because
I think for time's sake, as I mentioned, malnutrition in its it could be an entirely different lecture, but just very briefly, malnutrition is something that we need to be aware of as we get older. Whether you are overweight or underweight, you can still be malnourished. And so, like we talked about, really making sure that you're balancing all of those healthy recommendations is the best general takeaway message from this slideshow that I'm just going to zip through. But this is good. We had a good discussion. And then just very quickly, in summary, we know that nutrition is really important for all aspects of our health, not only our physical health, but also our mental health and emotional well-being. We know that older adults, as we age, we are more at risk of malnutrition. It's a balance between our diet, the food that we're eating, the liquids that we're drinking, and also exercise. And then really finding what works for you and the people around you to help make it sustainable so that you can have the best nutritional status possible. I think that's it. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much to Dr. Love for that presentation. And as mentioned, we can send out some of these resources, like the different sites that were mentioned. There are also, again, hard copy resources on the back table, including some stuff on where there are free meals in the Philadelphia area, some stuff on reading the labels like Dr. Love was talking about. Before folks get up and leave, just a couple quick announcements.
Okay.
Please do, before you leave, return, and actually Michael, if you pass these around, if anyone did not get one when they came in, the demographic and evaluation sheets. So they are two-sided, and again, this just helps us have more information we can share, and more information we receive about how to make these programs better in the future. Be sure that we're talking about topics, health topics that are of interest to you all. If anyone came on SEPTA and needs the transit reimbursement, see me before you leave. I have the SEPTA cards up here. And we hope to see you again at an upcoming Doctors In program.